Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 13th episode of the Humans and Wildlife Show. My name is Georgia Oteri. I'm your co-host, and with us here today is our other host, Christian Sase. Christian, what are we going to talk about today?
Yes, hi, Georgia. This is a very interesting topic today. It's all about drones and wildlife. And I just wanted to quickly say also, before we even start, Peter Bittner's just jumped in from HAPS. So let's get him on board very quickly because I think he should be part of this because it's all about collaboration.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, it's Collaboration Day on HAPS. And here we have one of the co-founders of HAPS with us, Peter. Oh, is he here?
Yeah,
there we go.
Oops, we can't hear you, Peter.
Oh, yeah. Nope. No can hear. I see that you're not muted. Still can't hear you. I'll flip my thumb around if I can hear you. In the meantime, welcome to everyone in the audience. Klingon Bird.
How about now?
Yes. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, welcome everyone.
There we go. So sorry about that. Yes, good to see everyone in the comments here. I'm thrilled to be an honored guest here. I saw drones and wildlife and I jumped at the chance to come up. I teach drone videography and have done a lot of filming and photography of wildlife with drones. So this happens to be a very cool fit to jump in and say, hey, I would love to hear a little bit more about your other more distinguished and experienced guests here. Don't let me stand in the way.
Thank you, Peter. That's wonderful. Yes, I know you have done a lot of photography and videography, but I didn't know that you are such a drone specialist, which is absolutely wonderful. So let's jump right in. So today's guest is Dr. or Professor Emeritus of Wildlife Biology of McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. Professor David Bird is also a director on the Hancock Wildlife Foundation, and we've had David Hancock last time. So this is a very good sequence. And we're going to talk especially about drones. So without further ado, let's get Professor David Bird on board. And hi, David. Very nice to have you here.
Hi, my great pleasure to be here, Christian.
Well, it's really wonderful. I'm going to put the first question directly at you, David. How did you get into the world of drones?
Well, about, I'd say 14 years ago, one of my former ornithology students emailed me to ask me if I could help her retired engineer father living in Vancouver to design UAVs to repel starlings from vineyards, from a friend's vineyard in Kelowna, BC. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to help you. He wanted to have the drone look like a hawk. And so I said, well, I'm a bird of prey expert. Of course, I'll help him. And so the first question I asked him in my email to him was, what's a UAV? And he sent me this picture. It was a stylized drawing of a soldier bending down on one knee with a laptop in on his one knee. And on the other hand, he had this little microcopter. And he said, the military called them drones then. We people that were using them for other purposes kept calling them UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. And so as soon as I saw that picture and he explained what the soldier was supposed to be doing, I said, oh my God, I can put one of those things up over an eagle's nest or a hawk's nest and look inside and take pictures and save people tons of hours of climbing, plus all of the disturbance and stress to the birds. And so long story short, I ended up getting an initial research grant from the Molson Foundation in Toronto to embark on this, and they've been supporting my research ever since. And I've now enlisted another partner, Paul Pace, who is a retired aeronautical engineer and military scientist who had, at the time I met him, he had 30 years of experience working with drones. And so, and then thirdly, we've now enlisted the young professor at McGill who replaced me, Kyle Elliott. And so we have this team of 3 guys, and we work together on almost everything. We're like married at the hip, the 3 of us.
Well, that's fantastic. David, do you want to go straight into your presentation, and shall we get going with the topic? And we'll ask the audience to throw in lots of questions. Is that okay?
Well, before we do that, let's address the elephant in the room. There are a lot of misconceptions about drones among the public's eyes, all over the world for that matter. And I've been going to drone conferences everywhere all over the globe, giving talks and so on, and watching the evolution of drones to be used for non-military purposes, and of course seeing all sorts of papers being published. And the main concerns that the public has about drones are, first of all, the safety issue, the fact that these things can fall out of the sky. There was a famous case of a kid losing his eye to the falling drone of a neighbor and so on. And then there's the big brother concept. People are worried about the idea of the police taking, using these things to spy on us and maybe take our pictures at protest rallies and so on. And then there, of course, is the military aspect of it. The public, associate the word drone with spying and killing, of course, because, we always hear about, drone strikes and everything else. We just heard about one just recently in the Afghanistan crisis. And then finally, there is the idea that terrorists can use drones, and we have yet to see that become a major thing and so on. So those are all the different concerns that the public has. What I've been doing the last 13 to 14 years is to try and demonstrate that drones can be used for really, really good things. And because my specialty is wildlife in general, I've been grasping at every opportunity I can get to show neat things that drones can do. So we can start with the presentation now if you wish.
Very well. Georgia, do you want to just put it on the screen, please? And I'll
Oh, sure. I'm not sure which one it actually
this one. Wait a minute. Shall I put it?
It's just the one to call
the screen. Hang on.
Oh, is it this? Like here.
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, this is basically my wish list, and essentially, we've accomplished a lot. I've published about roughly a dozen papers now with various collaborators using drones to study wildlife. I would say mostly birds or whatever, but there still remains my so-called wish list of things that I would still like to do and cannot do yet because of regulation concerns and so on. And this one here, capturing insects, was something that I thought about independently of a former postdoc of mine in Spain. He actually designed a drone with a great big huge mouth on the front of it to fly in the air, but I don't know if he was all that successful with it, so he dropped the idea. Recently, though, I went back to Paul Pace, the guy I was telling you about earlier. I'm the guy that comes up with all these crazy ideas, and Paul Pace is the engineer who can tell me, yeah, we can do that or we can't. And when I told him about the idea about dragging nets in behind drones, he tried it out in his neighborhood in Ottawa. And now we've got some undergraduate students up in the Kanauk Nature Reserve in Quebec under the guidance of our third partner, Kyle Elliott. And they're getting great success in capturing insects by dragging these nets behind the drones. And as far as I know, there was one other study published on this, someone down in the southern states and so on. But as far as I know, this is the most comprehensive effort to look at the efficacy of doing this.
So just to clarify, the drone is flying around with this net in the air, almost like a fishing boat or something, catching fish in the water. And the drone allows you to sample insects that are higher than you might be able to reach otherwise. Is that correct?
Well, not so much higher, Georgia, as much as more safely. My original idea was to have a drone flying with a net behind it, or sticky tape or whatever, right over the top of a canopy of a forest, because you can't fly a Cessna aircraft that low to collect insects. And someone did publish a paper many, many years ago on doing that, but there's no way you can fly a Cessna right over the tops of the trees. And my thought was that we might be able to even discover some new insects that no one's ever captured before, because how can you be in the air above the canopy? Now, what's happened now is with this particular study is that we're not only looking for perhaps new insects that haven't been discovered before, but more importantly, we're trying to use this technique to get numbers of insects so we can actually sample insect populations. Very recently, there have been a number of papers that have come out showing that insect populations are greatly in decline. As much as 40% have disappeared, insect biota. And so using a technique like this, we might be able to get an idea of how many insects are in a given area, for example, and what's the variety, which ones are missing and which ones are not.
Yeah, David, do you want to ask George?
Go ahead, Christian. No.
Okay, I'll go ahead. We're both very keen to interview you, David.
Yeah.
So the question here from Gentleman Ghost is a very good question. So he says, my obvious question, limitation of drones for wildlife because of their sound interfering with passive observation. I think we were talking about that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it all depends on what the purpose of the drone that you're doing. For example, yes, a drone does make the larger the drone, the more noise they make. Let's take the example of using my original idea, where that's to fly a drone over an eagle or a hawk's nest to count how many eggs are in the nest, or how many young hatch from those eggs, or equally important, what is the age of those young? So in other words, is it time to climb the tree and put the little aluminum numbered rings on their legs? And so it doesn't really matter whether the drone is noisy in that case or not, because you don't want the adult to stay in the nest while you're doing that. You want them to leave the nest so you can get a quick look. Literally, by the time you launch the drone in the air and fly it over that nest and bring it back and walk it away with it, you're talking about 5 to 6 minutes. If you were to climb that tree instead, making all kinds of noise or whatever, then that could take as much as an hour. Plus, there's the dangerous component of it as well. And so it all depends really what you want to do. For example, there are two different kinds. There's the rotary drones, which are quite noisy, and then there's the fixed wing drones that look like radio-controlled airplanes. And those ones, you're more likely, they stay up longer, and those ones you're more likely to fly about 300 to 400 feet over your target animals, and they don't even know it's there. For example, if I was going to do some counts of gannets, which are a type of seabird that nest on these big rock stacks, like thousands of birds or whatever, and this is on my wish list, I wouldn't use a noisy rotary drone for that job. I would instead fly a fixed wing about 300 to 400 feet over and actually painted to look like a gannet. And we have one to do that. I just haven't been able to find a place that will allow us to do it, because they're all afraid we're going to disturb the birds. But that's the whole point. We're trying to find an alternative way to them doing these censuses with Cessna aircraft, or helicopters, which are considerably noisier than a drone.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's easy to take for granted that as wildlife biologists, we are often not nearly as sneaky as we think we are. So there's always trade-offs involved with our different observation techniques. So I'm curious to see what more of your presentation you have.
Yes. Well, looking at the slide right here, what you're seeing there is you're seeing a small falcon called an American kestrel. It's actually declining. And we could talk about that in a future broadcast if you'd like. And because there's going to be a big symposium on this species, and I'm doing the leadoff paper because I studied kestrels for 40 years. And so here I've been talking to you about flying a drone over an eagle's nest or a hawk's nest. Well, that's not very difficult because they're out in the open and usually in the top of a tree. And you would have seen this with the last speaker, David Hancock, who's been studying bald eagles for all his life. But these kestrels nest in holes, mostly in holes in nest boxes or buildings or trees. And so how are you going to fly a drone over that? And so I posed this problem to my partner, Paul Pace, and he says, I'll tell you what we're going to do, just like you see in the other picture. We're going to affix a special arm on the front and put a remote little camera on the end of it. And then the idea would be is that with steady hands, you fly the drone up to the nest hole, stick the camera in the hole, and take pictures. And we've got great pictures of both kestrel babies and kestrel eggs, and the technique works great. The only thing is that we also did a little bit of a side study on what is the minimum amount of, or the maximum amount of wind that you can do this in. And I think it was something like if the winds were over 2 knots, then there was a lot of wavering and it was hard to get the the arm, the camera arm into the hole. But that's Paul Pace's, he's not a young man anymore. I know another young man on the West Coast here who's going to try and repeat these experiments, who can land a drone through a car window and land it on the front seat of a car. And so I want to get him to do it to see if he can do it in even higher winds.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
and oh, sorry, Georgia, go on, please.
No, go ahead.
I'm just interested, of course, as a engineer, isn't the flight stability compromised, David, when you do such things?
The flight stability?
Yes,
By the balance, you mean, of the drone
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
No,
Because you
actually,
put a long
that's the
arm
whole
on
point.
it.
That's the beauty of working with a guy like Paul Pace, who's an aeronautical engineer, is he was able to work all that out and found that he could put this light little camera on the end of this off the shelf. And I want to underline the word off the shelf, because my main goal is to work with drones that wildlife biologists can buy from the internet or in a store or whatever. I'm not interested in having designing drones that cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars. The problem with these drones is they do crash occasionally. And if you go out in the field in a remote place and crash a $100,000 drone, that can be problems. Let me tell you a very quick story. We had an $8,000 drone flying to count murres, which are types of seabirds, on a rocky cliff of Gull Island in Newfoundland. And out of the blue, when the drone was about 100 yards away from landing at our feet safely, a herring gull struck the drone and knocked it into the ocean and destroyed it, and along with an expensive GoPro camera too. And I didn't even know that herring gulls were aggressive until I talked to the seabird biologists, which were standing right beside me. I said, are herring gulls that aggressive? And they said, oh yeah, they'll hit you if you go near their nest. And I said, why didn't you tell me that? I would never have flown a drone anywhere near herring gull nests. But anyway, live and learn, I say.
And here we actually see on the picture what you were explaining. That's what Peter was already remarking. This takes incredible skill, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, that's Paul Pace standing there in his backyard practicing. Wow. What we did first is he got a little nest box he made of his own and put it up in a tree and put some chicken eggs in it, some black ones and some white ones, just to see how they looked in the dimming light or whatever, because it is dim in the side of the nest box, and got those pictures right there. And they came out really well. And what's exciting about this, Christian and Georgia, is that it's a proof of concept. Yes, it's going to be useful for kestrel studies, but there are many other birds and even other critters that live in holes. And so we've now shown that you can take a drone, modify it, and get pictures inside the holes or cavities of wildlife. That's why I'm excited about this.
Yeah, actually, I do. I study bats and I also do rock climbing. And this past summer, we were rock climbing and I brought my drone so I could film us climbing. And there was a big crack in the side of the rock we were climbing, and it had a bunch of bats in it, all these bats squeaking. And I had my drone and they stayed in the hole, but I would have really liked a way to see in there a little bit better. So I can imagine all kinds of exciting applications for this stuff.
Well, let's talk about bats just for a second. I'll get to that picture in a minute, but let's just talk about bats for a second. We have published one paper already on the use of drones to look at bats. Unfortunately, it showed that drones aren't necessarily the best tool to track bats, to find out where their nest holes are and so on, where their their roosting caves are, because they do tend to interfere, that the noise actually disturbs the bats. And so I'm prepared to take negative results as long as positive results, as long as it's truthful. And so we're working on another project right now where we're looking to see whether if we use smaller drones as opposed to bigger ones, in other words, less noisy ones. And that's what we're tending to find out, that the less noisy drones can be used to detect bats. And so we're in the throes of publishing that paper right now. Now, this picture you're looking at is very simply the place that Paul Pace went this past spring with the drone to actually test drive our modified drone on an American kestrel nest box. And we got some great pictures with that. I don't know if it's in the next slide or not.
Okay, do you want me to go one further with the slide? Hang on.
Yeah, this is two pictures showing you one nest box where you can actually see some broken eggshells from some previously hatched eggs, and then the one at the bottom is showing some baby kestrels, and you can easily count those babies and you can age them. So then you can tell your researchers that you're working with, yeah, the chicks are old enough to climb up to, and that way, putting this drone up there and looking inside those nest boxes, as I said, takes about a couple of minutes. Instead of carrying a heavy ladder across a couple of fields or whatever, you just simply go there with your little drone, stick it in there, take a picture, and you can see instantaneously whether you need to go get the ladder and then put the little leg bands on the birds.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Well, what this picture is showing you here and why it's on my wish list is that I have been trying for the last 10 years to convince the California condor people in the States. I've gone to the Peregrine Fund in Boise. I've gone to the Fish and Wildlife Service because there are many different parties studying condors. And condors, like kestrels, nest in cavities. They don't nest in open on tops of trees or that sort of thing. They nest in caves. And because of that, it's very dark in there. And so, and California condors, of course, are highly regulated. They're such an endangered species and so that's why I haven't been able to get permission yet to do it. And likely what will happen is that some American biologist will eventually get permission to do it, and I'll be left applauding them for their success. Because to me, some of these condors will nest up a cliff about 800 feet high. And so for you to try and climb to that is very dangerous and time consuming and probably more disruptive to the condors than flying a drone up there. But I hasten to add that I'm not just interested in to know whether the drone can get good pictures, either in a cave or in an open nest. I'm even more interested to know on how does the adult birds react to the drone? Do they attack it? Do they stand by? Do they go away? Or are they just curious? And we've already published one paper showing that the birds that are most aggressive to these things are ospreys. But ironically, they're aggressive to them in Montana, but not in Finland. The Finnish biologists that I work with have been using drones to count osprey nestlings for the last several years and have had no incidents of a drone being struck by an osprey. But in Montana, when we did our published study and collected our data, we had 2 such attacks. And ospreys hate these things, actually, and they'll even attack them when they're whirring on the ground, the rotary ones. So these are all things that I'm kind of looking at. So that's what that cave one's all about.
Yeah, David, I've just got, I think Peter, who's got a lot of drone experience, has some experience with wildlife conservation. Maybe, Peter, could you just elaborate a bit more of what you've been doing?
Sure. So it's really interesting to hear, Professor, about all of these amazing kind of proof of concept and studies using drones for this really highly specialized type of field research. In my experience, so I used to work as a consultant for the Wildlife Conservation Society in Mongolia that was actually tracking megafauna, in particular saiga antelope, using drones, because in Mongolia there's just so much open terrain. It can be very difficult to actually approach some of these incredibly fast land mammals, right? I mean, these saiga, I have a link here. Maybe I can screen share what they look like because they are fascinating creatures. But let's see if I can, I'll just take a screenshot. They are pretty funky looking. They have almost like an elephant-like nose, but they look in many ways like a deer. And here I'll just upload this image, but it's been used for population census research in a number of areas of Mongolia, particularly in the open plains and the desert, where it's incredibly difficult to track them. For tagging, for example, you need to get a whole team of researchers on motorbikes to herd them using nets, to get into a very confined space to be able to tranquilize and really assess the well-being, or even, put trackers on them. So these are highly at risk. Antelope, there've been massive die-offs throughout Central Asia due to a number of, I think, fungal, pathogens that have come more and more common as a result of climate change. But anyway, fascinating to hear about some of these applications for bird life too, and that's just truly amazing. You can get a pretty good count at about 500 feet even, which is pretty high up. You're able to see the dots down there on the field. I wish I had a photo of that. Unfortunately, that belongs on my colleague's hard drive somewhere, but it's really interesting to see. I'm wondering, Professor, have you had any issues of birds abandoning nests or being frightened, to the point where it actually impedes some of the research you're trying to do, or really, could be counterproductive?
Not at all. In fact, I have a colleague that I'm giving co-presenting with at the Bird of Prey conference this fall in Boise, virtually, of course. And he's done something like 200 missions flying a Mavic drone, which you buy off the shelf for not very much money, over bald eagle nests in Besner Lake in Saskatchewan. 200 missions. And he's got photographs of every one of those nests, and he's never had a single attack by a bald eagle. Now, having said that, it all really depends, and this is why I'm doing these studies, and I'm trying to get as many different species as possible. So whenever I hear of somebody who's doing a study, for example, recently there's one done on golden eagles, and I immediately contacted the guy and said, please send me any information you have on how the eagles are responding to the drones, because I'm pretty sure that peregrine falcons will take some objection to drones flying near their nests. I already know of the odd attack or whatever, but I do not know of any cases where birds have abandoned their nest, abandoned eggs, abandoned babies or whatever. It would take actually a hell of a lot to get to get any raptor to abandon their babies, maybe eggs, but I don't know of any case of drones doing that at all. So I'm very confident this is a great technique to use. There's a really interesting thing going on in Australia. I was just emailing the guy right now because a new study has just come out showing that, well, I don't know if it's called a study, but it was a popular article showing that ravens in Canberra, Australia, are attacking delivery drones during the pandemic. And of course, the companies who are sending these drones out are not very happy about that. And the reason why this is of importance is because there's an eagle living in Australia called the wedge-tailed eagle, and they absolutely hate drones. And they'll go out of their way to attack them, even if they're not near their nests. And they've been known to take down way over 30 drones of various sizes and shapes and expenses, some of them worth over $80,000. And these are
David,
not drones.
I could tell you that from my direct experience when I was in New South Wales, and the drones had just come out, and I was flying just along one of the hills there, and it was completely clear. I could see what was going on my screen, and when I turned the drone around, suddenly the drone went tumbling. I looked up, and wham, a wedge-tailed eagle hit my drone, and it just made it. So I've had first-hand experience, and I have it on video actually on the drone website. So I know about it.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's all a matter of choosing the right drone for the job. And if you want to look into a hawk's nest or an eagle's nest, or as I've shown you, a kestrel nest hole, there's always a way to do that sort of thing. And I'm looking at some of the comments here about drones scaring birds away. Well, there are actually friends of mine out there that are doing just that. They're trying to use drones to scare birds away from airports and town landfill sites. And there are companies in I don't know about the States, but in Canada, one's called Goosebusters, and they actually run by young kids, teenagers, who use drones to haze geese and gulls out of parks and golf courses and so on. And of course, if you really want to make the drone scare birds away, you can do that. I mean,
yeah. Well, it sounds like maybe this is like future work for Peter, and you can expand into other types of wildlife drone work.
Yeah, that's very interesting application. I'm sorry I have to take off for now. I'll be here in the comments. Really amazing to learn about all this research, David. And guys, would you mind introducing me to Professor? I would love to stay in touch and learn more. Maybe even attend some of these virtual events too that you're speaking at, David.
I'd love to hear from you, Peter. Christian will give you or Georgia will give you my email address. I'd love to talk to you.
Perfect. Yeah, likewise. Thanks again, guys.
Peter. Thanks. That was great contribution. Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
No, actually, Peter raised a very good point. And we've been focusing a lot on looking into bird's nest or whatever, but people all over the world are using drones to count wildlife from the air, and not just birds, like moving, wildebeest and elephants and all sorts of things. And some of those animals are definitely more sensitive to drones than others. Elephants, for example, apparently have the ability to hear even a fixed-wing drone flying over top of them, because their ability to hear infrasounds and very, very light frequency sounds. So again, it's a matter of us designing drones that overcome these problems and so on. And I'd like to add in about counting animals. There's also the use of infrared camera lens. You don't have to use regular GoPro cameras or regular lens on these things. You can put infrared camera lenses, and the U.S. Geological Survey for years has been counting sandhill crane flocks on the ground and sage grouse with infrared cameras and so on. We were experimenting with as well, but we found that if there's any kind of vegetation over the ground nest, say of bobolinks, a little tiny songbird that lives in farmers' fields, then the infrared camera cannot pick up the heat signature from the nest or the eggs or whatever. And so you really have to have a nest that's out in the open that has no covering over top. It's the same with moose. There was a study done in Ontario several years ago where they tried to count moose in Ontario. And my former graduate student was working with them. And as soon as the moose got under cover, under any kind of trees, shrubs or whatever, you couldn't detect them with the infrared cameras.
Wow, that's there's limitations with drones, and you just covered a lot of them, the being able to see things, and also these animals like bats and elephants that are more sensitive to the sounds. Did you want to get back to your presentation?
Yeah, because there's a couple of other interesting things there. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's flip back to that. I'll get Christian and me out here.
I just saw the FLIR camera, so I thought that must be the
yeah. There you go. And I think we've covered that enough. We want to move on to the next picture. Okay, this is really interesting. I was at a bird conference several years ago when this professor from Gettysburg College, Andy Wilson, and his undergrad students, what they did is they dangled a microphone about 60 feet below a off-the-shelf UAV, and they compared it. They flew it through the forest, and they compared it to a human walking through the forest and doing point counts, where you stop every prescribed distance, and then you listen for calls of birds. You record them, and then you can say, okay, there's so many species in the woods today, or whatever. And the idea was to see how well the drone did, and the drone did extremely well. And so what's a little bit upsetting about it is no one has picked up on this at all. And so one of the next things that Kyle Elliott and Paul Pace and I are going to work on is I would like to put on a drone not just a microphone to pick up the songs of calls, but also to have a playback machine on there, so we actually play a song or a call of a bird that we're trying to find, or an animal we're trying to find. Could be a barred owl. In this case, we all know that ivory-billed woodpeckers are extinct, but I did have the idea of taking a drone down there to those swampy forests and try to see if we could pick up the call of one. But I'm pretty convinced now they're gone. But the idea is that you play the call of the bird, and then you record if the bird calls back, which they often do when you play them. And this is a project that's on my wish list.
Yeah, so this is really cool because it's combining what's old, like these old methods of using playback calls and just walking and looking with drones, putting the thing that's emitting the bird call on the drone and using the drone as your eyes instead of the person. So it's really cool how the drones are like emphasizing the techniques that we've already found to be tried and true, and building upon them. Yeah. We have some interesting questions. James Bourne asks if costs and regulations are significantly different between fixed wing and rotor drones. Do you know?
Well, I haven't looked at the latest regulations. In Canada, for example, we have to deal with Transport Canada, and in the States, it's the FAA. But it has a lot to do with the size of the drone. And this is a very good question that's being asked here, because as I've told you earlier, fixed wing drones are often more likely to be flown at much higher heights, altitudes than fixed wing or the rotary machines. The rotary machines they don't stay up as long, and they are definitely more intrusive than flying something 300 or 400 feet high. So I'm sure the regulations are going to be a little bit different, but it doesn't overall. If you're going to fly a drone, or as they call them they call them RPAS, remotely piloted aircraft. By and large, you've got to follow the regulations, and there's a certain minimum weight. I think it's 250 grams. If your drone weighs less than 250 grams, you don't need to abide by any regulations. Other than that, you can't obviously fly these near an aerodrome of any kind, or you can't annoy people at a nude beach or something like that. But that is the magic number, is 250 grams. So it just turns out that the Mini Mavic made by DJI is exactly about 249 grams. And so if you put things on that, of course, you may be going over the limit, then you've got to get your various permits and so on. But it's funny about the permits,
sorry,
because
we have an interesting question here. Sorry, we're getting lots of questions. Sorry to interrupt, but
okay, sure,
just the one that appeared on the screen, I would just like to read out, if I can find it. It suddenly disappeared.
I'll
you
show
read
it
it,
again.
Georgia.
There you go.
It disappeared. Where did it go? I don't know.
It's back here. I'll read it. Fascinating work, Dr. Bird. My question is, can drones be used to do something functional, such as when eagle habitat food supply is low? Can a drone be used to bring in food? So food delivery drone service for birds. This sounds like maybe a future research idea for you.
Actually, it's already being done. And there was an article that came out, it went viral all over the world about maybe roughly a year ago. The Israeli army actually used one of their fancy drones to deliver food to a vulture. I forget the species. There was a chick abandoned by its parents on a cliff site, and no one could get to it. So they actually did a modeling. They created a fake cliff in a hangar so they could get everything just right. This is what the Israeli army would do. And they did exactly that. They used the drone. So I actually, when I saw this story, I keep file folders on anything. And I thought, okay, now we do know that drones could be used to deliver food. Now, I'm not sure that's going to be practical if you've got a whole bunch of birds of prey that are in trouble or whatever. But if you do have a pair of birds that are in an area that the only way you can get to them with a drone, sure, this is very doable.
That's so cool. And we have another comment from David Howden, who is an amateur entomologist in the UK. He's curious about a link to something describing how the insect net drone was designed. Could be something to try. I think David Howden wants to try this out in the area around him. Are there any resources online for doing this, modifying the drones?
It's all brand new stuff. I think the best thing for him to do would be to email me directly, and I'll put him in touch with Paul Pace, and Paul will tell him. We are happy to share information and get other people doing this work. It's not a matter of trying to keep it to ourselves or whatever. It's we definitely like to share it and get other people to do it, because that's the whole idea. I like the idea of being a pioneer with this, and that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of retired, but I can't walk away from this stuff because it's so exciting. It's something that every scientist dreams of, is being on the wave or the cusp of something that's pioneering, game-changing technology, and that's what this is. So have David contact me, and I'll get him in touch with Paul Pace.
Okay, David, something about this slide, or do you want to skip this
Oh,
one?
no, I got to talk about this for sure. You remember I said earlier about people using drones to scare away birds? Well, there's a number of people out there doing that with some success. But the thing is, the idea of using a radio-controlled airplane that looks like a hawk is not new. It was done back in the 60s by Transport Canada. The problem is that the nuisance birds, they habituate to it. If they don't get hurt or killed in any way, then they get habituated. The only thing they don't habituate to are live trained falcons. And so we're trying to come up with drones that mimic live trained falcons. And so this is a whole talk in itself, essentially, but I'll make it very quick. I think we need to have drones that do more than just appear and make some noise. I think they have to make maybe alarm calls or some Raptor calls or shoot some kind of pellets that sting, although Paul Pace has told me that it's very difficult to be accurate shooting any kind of rock salt or small stones or something from a drone to hit something flying in the air. He says it's almost impossible. So I have the idea of what about putting on green laser beams on a sort of a revolving turret, because birds hate green laser beams. You know, those things that some idiots that try and fly or shine into the lights of pilots' eyes. There was a case of that just recently, of someone doing such a stupid thing. Anyway, not easy to get permission from the FAA and Transport Canada to mount a laser gun on a drone, which is already on shaky ground with some of the public. So that's going to happen someday. They're actually using laser beams like the one you see in this picture here on poles on farms in California, and they're about 95% effective in scaring birds away because they don't like green laser beam. But they're also dangerous. I mean, if you had somebody wander onto the property and got one of those laser beams in the face, it would blind them. So it's a bit risky technology so far.
Okay.
Well, this is all about radio tracking. And we've done a little bit of work with radio tracking. The first time we tried it out here in British Columbia, Paul Pace came out here. We found out there was a lot of interference between the drone's motor and the receiver on the drone. And so we couldn't get it to work. Meanwhile, Debbie Saunders and her Australian colleagues came up with a fairly expensive but very effective drone machine for tracking wildlife. And they're getting contracts all over the world now because she hires herself out. And I'm hoping to collaborate with her because, as I said to you earlier, Paul and I are really interested in using off-the-shelf equipment that wildlife biologists can afford. We cannot afford $100,000 machines. That's why you have to hire Debbie and her company, because to get a machine of your own is not cheap to develop. So we're trying to do this, and that's what Paul's done here. He's managed to not only affix a receiver and antenna to an off-the-shelf, inexpensive drone, but it actually works, and he's found a way to get around the static interference as well. So that's what this is all about. We're still looking for a test case on which to try this with somewhere in Canada.
Yeah, David, I have a quick question. I'm not so worried about the technology. You know that I do a lot of technical things. That's why I'm interested. I'm more worried about the permits that you need in order to even fly these things. I think the technology to do this, I could do, but would it be very difficult to get permits? And so
all you need to do is go to the Transport Canada website in Canada and the FAA one, and it's very straightforward what you have to do. It all depends on what you're trying to do. One of the things, because I see where the time is, we're running out of time here, and I want to say this, in the States and in Canada, the one thing that we're all hoping for, all the people that want to use drones, including delivering things and counting animals or whatever, is beyond visual line of sight. We all want the ability to let our drones go up in the air and fly over top of a forest out of our sight, which you can't do now. You can get permission for it, but you've really got to prove that you've had a lot of experience in the area, and you're maybe only going to be allowed to do it in a remote forest, maybe the tundra up north or over the ocean. But for you to try and get beyond visual line of sight in a forest down here in the boreal forest or whatever, very difficult to do. And the reason is that we need some technology called sense and avoid, which means a little box that goes on your drone, in your Cessna airplane, or even your 747 that allows you to avoid other things flying near it. So eventually all vehicles, whether it's on the ground or in the air or in the water, are all going to have this sense and avoid technology, and they'll know where. And then you'll start seeing drones delivering packages all over cities everywhere.
That's interesting. David, is there any last slide that you want us to show?
Let's pass on this one here. This is just simply looking at into chimney swifts and collecting data on the microhabitat. Go to the next one there, please.
Sure, 1 second.
Yeah, this is another interesting thing. We're going to be working on this soon. This is another one of my wish list. It's well known that you can capture animals as big as a moose or a caribou by firing a Spider-Man type net over top of it from a manned helicopter, or I should say crewed helicopter. And I think we could probably mount net guns and so on a drone, so you could capture birds like that short-eared owl that you're seeing there that spends a lot of time on the ground. Next slide there, please. And this is just talking about sensitive void technology. If we had it, we could put it on a plane like that fixed wing drone, and have that fly for hundreds of miles up a river and take pictures and count endangered species like harlequin ducks. But again, you have to be able to know that plane is not going to come around the corner and hit a helicopter or a Cessna with some fishermen or something like that. So next slide, please. And this, again, is talking about beyond visual line of sight. If we could do it, we could actually have them flying along wind turbine fields and power lines to count, to look for, birds that have hit the blades or got fried on the wires or whatever. But again, not easy to do that without beyond visual line of sight. Next. And, we've been talking a lot about the air. What about other drones? What about drones that go under the water? Those are drones as well. There are drones that go under the ground or on the ground. Like this picture here, I'm looking for a drone that could go under the water and maybe look at loon foraging behavior. That's an underwater swimmer or cormorants or whatever, or going into a burrowing owl's nest in the ground, having a drone that can climb down into the hole and see how old the chicks are and count the chicks. And then this is coming back to capturing wildlife. What about mounting a tranquilizer gun on a drone to tranquilize a dangerous polar bear or something like that? I have contacted the Polar Bear Research Society, or whatever they call themselves, to see if I could work with a polar bear biologist in Canada. And they don't want to do it. They just want to do what they've always done and land the helicopter with biologists near the thing and get out and approach the bear and use a regular gun. I don't understand the logic of that, but it's going to be done someday, I guarantee it.
Okay, that's another topic. Maybe we'll do that on another day, David.
Yes, I understand. We've run out of the time. There's so much to talk about with drones. It isn't funny.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing and really cool topic. And thank you so much, Dr. Bird, for sharing all of your experiences with us. You're clearly really pushing the drone wildlife envelope in a lot of different directions and doing a lot of really cool collaborations with different people. So you were the perfect guest to first talk about wildlife and drones with on the show. Is there anything else you want us to know or take away from this before we go?
Well, I just want people to give drones a chance. I mean, you're going to hear about negative headlines, because those are the headlines that catch the news or whatever. But I want people to consider the fact that drones are being used for a lot of good things, which don't capture the headlines near as much. And to be frank with you, I think drones are here to stay. And no matter what they do, even if one took down a jetliner, there might be an initial gut reaction to shut down all drone use or whatever. But, there's always a way of finding technology like sensitive void technology to ground the problems. And so I really think that they're here to stay, and they're very beneficial for society. We just have to make sure that they're very safe. That's all.
Thank you so much, David. That was incredible. So, I mean, I'm sure we'll stay in touch, and we'll have you on again talking about kestrels and also the Canada jay, right? That's going to be
that's another good subject for me.
Yes. And
I have to say, you have the best dressed guest award, I believe. I love your shirt. We've got some comments about the shirt.
Really? You don't think it should be birds?
Well, I think, wildlife is close enough. And you did mention the underwater drones towards the end. So we'll count it.
But it's also food for ospreys and bald eagles.
Right. Of course.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you also to our audience for also Peter Bidner coming on board. Thank you to David Howden Terry Green and also Deanna Cooper for being so kind and putting some donations here. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And Georgia, do we know what's on next week? I don't know.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. No, Christian, we don't know what's on next week because I
let it be a surprise.
I haven't finalized an interview for next week yet. But Christian and I will definitely be here next week, as always, to bring you the 14th episode of the Humans and Wildlife Show. To be determined. It's a mystery. And thank you, Alien Charmers, for the additional last-minute donation. We really appreciate it, Christian and I. It's great motivation to keep doing this, and we really love having you all every week and all of your interesting comments and questions in the audience. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week at the same time.
Thank you.